So that brings us to the first presentation of the hour. And this presentation is Mr. Michael Apollo, and he's speaking on behavior change in the new reality. Little information about Michael Apollo. Michael Apollo is a leader in workplace mindfulness and in executive development with a long-standing practice in mindfulness. He is a registered mental health clinician, emotional intelligence coach, and the founder and president of Mindful Gateway, a learning and development consultancy that has introduced mindfulness to over 1 million people. He has worked with political leaders, multi-nation organizations, and elite athletes. One day he'll work with me. And champions winning sports teams. He lives in Toronto, Canada, and has a 5-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter who continue to be his greatest mindfulness teachers. With that being said, I would like to introduce Mr. Michael Apollo using the words from Mother Teresa. Yesterday is gone, tomorrow has not yet come. We have only today. Let us begin.
Thank you so much, Donovan and Nathan, and welcome to you all. I'm so grateful to be here and to have this time with you. I'm Michael Apollo, and without further ado, I would like us to seize this moment and dive right in. So I'm going to share my slides with you to guide us along for this journey. And as Donovan and Nathan have shared, you know, right now we are living in unprecedented times, and this is having an unprecedented impact on all of us around the world. And I've had the great privilege of working in this field of mindfulness and to be able to share these types of techniques and tools and practices that can help you to stay well in the moment. And what I'm going to explore today is really looking at mindfulness and the new reality. And the journey that we're going to go on right now is one where at first I'm going to just share with you a bit of the current situation that the pandemic has provided to us. Then I'm going to shift and I'm going to share with you how to mindfully respond to the pandemic. So what is some of the research saying? What are some of the leading insights saying that, you know, the helpful approaches that we can take to really support ourselves in the moment. And then I'm going to move in and I'm going to share with you some tactics to support mental and physical well-being during this time as we move through it. We're actually going to go through an experience. So we're going to go through a mindfulness experience as well. And then I'm going to walk you through a number of different practices from a resource guide that we're going to distribute to each and every one of you to be able to reference to support yourself in self-care as you move forward within your lives. And so as we begin right now, as you all come in here, whatever setting that you may find yourself in, let's just take a collective deep breath in and a deep breath out and just sigh and just acknowledge the fact that we have arrived here right now. You may have a lot of things on your plate. You may have a number of things in your environment pulling at your attention. Let's just take this moment to maybe silence our phones, shut down our tabs, and just for these next 25 minutes where I have your attention, we can bring ourselves fully to bear at this time. Great. So here we are, the current situation that we find ourselves in. This is a unique time in human civilization where the entire planet's population is being impacted in a very similar way. And the interesting reality that we find ourselves in is one where these types of disruptions to the regular patterns that we sort of move throughout our day, the habits that we have, you know, be it if we're working virtually fully or have been switching in and out of work, or we are out of the office for a while, or we're at home and we have, you know, work-life balance is out the door. It's now work-life blending. And where we have our little colleagues, little coworkers running around with us day in, day out. This has disrupted sort of the regular way that we go about our days. And the habits that we usually have that we would use to take care of ourselves, like, for example, walking from one place to the next, interacting with certain people, going for our favorite, you know, coffee or cappuccino or tea, all of that has sort of shifted. And what's really interesting is all these little practices that we've sort of built around our life to help support us, they sort of got shaken up a little bit. And this is having a definitive impact on us. In addition, there's so much more media. Like, you know, here I have a number of these media articles that I've shared here for you. There's so much influx of media and so much more time that we're spending on digital devices that this too is affecting our mental health in a really big way. As well, this increased pressure that we're dealing with as well is sort of causing us to be in front of a desk longer, and it's shifting the amount of physical variation that we have. Getting up and moving, we're doing that less, and also connecting with others, we're doing that less. And all the research is showing that this is having an impact on us. Of course, there's the economic impact, and also there is the social transformation that's happening around the world as well right now. A lot of issues coming to bear. So we got to understand that, you know, there's a lot that we're holding right now. So how can we hold this, right? And the reality is, looking at some of the research, just so that we can see very clearly what's happening here. Some of the research from Zapier and Stanford, what they're finding is that there's roughly like 40 to 65% of, just to give you a snapshot of the North American workforce, has transitioned to be working at home or predominantly in a virtual type of setting, in a virtual space. And this is massive, right? When before it was roughly around like 30%. So there's been a massive migration to a different way of interacting. And it's a big reality specifically for knowledge workers. And when we look at the other 50%, it's roughly 25% essential workers and 25% unemployed. So when we look at sort of the impact of how things have shifted, this is really, really big. When we look at as well, what's really interesting, when we look at some of these, they're called VPNs, virtual private networks, what they do is they track how much time people are engaged in different activities. And so NordVPN is one of these providers, and they found off of like hundreds of thousands of people that we're working more now, especially when we're working sort of virtually, that there's roughly almost like a 2-hour increase in amount of time spent working. What I found working with a lot of people and a lot of people's minds during this time, specifically in the workplace, there's also this sort of sense where I'm not doing enough, or I could be doing better. I think this is really important to note. You know, we're sort of extending the time that we're working because we're much more digitally connected. But then there's also this sort of increased internal pressure that we're bringing to ourselves. I think that's just important just to bring into awareness. Another really interesting study came out by Human Resource Executive. They found that 88% of workers have experienced moderate to extreme stress during the pandemic. And roughly around that amount, that percentage as well, have listed that this time has been the most stressful time in their work lives ever. So let's just take a moment, you know, let's breathe that in. This is a reality that we're dealing with. And it's really important for us to see this clearly, especially right now, because even if we're coping now, or even having a bit of trouble coping right now, the reality is that this is most likely going to continue. And the body and the brain, so our neurophysiology, does not like to deal with this type of stress and this dramatic change that we're dealing with. And maybe some of you have heard of this VUCA acronym, VUCA. And I think this is a really important acronym to share here with you all. It's an acronym that they actually used to categorize something called, or to characterize, the fog of war. So on the battlefield, what would happen would be there would be sort of a fog would come in, and, or even just in the battlefield, you wouldn't know what's going to come at you at any time. And to depict that, there are these 4 key things that depict what that feels like. And also that depicts what a high stress environment is. A high stress environment is one that our bodies are getting really impacted with, and also our minds. The first is the V, which is volatile. It's volatile. Things are changing constantly. The second thing is uncertainty. Here, you don't know what's going to come at you at any time. The third one is complexity. So with complexity is that there's so many things that we need to take in consideration. There's so much information coming our way. And the fourth is ambiguity. We don't know the right way forward. We could just sort of make best guesses. And what I find really interesting is that this is a really good depiction of what we're dealing with right now, is a VUCA environment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So just check in. Do you think that we've been dealing with this? Have you been dealing with a little bit of this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity? I see some notes coming in here. Wendy and Don, thank you. Yeah, it's a bit true. You know, the interesting thing is, even before the pandemic, this acronym was being used in the workplace. We're living in VUCA environments. Workplaces are getting more and more complex. There's much more uncertainty happening right now. It's actually on an exponential curve. And it's getting quicker, then more organizations are being able to become more resilient to that. I think that's really important. Resilience is a really key thing here, because that's what we need to be able to develop to be able to deal with this. But how do you do that, right? How do you do that? It's interesting as well. I've been working with a number of leaders and organizations, and they say that it just seems right now that we've had to throw all our sort of strategies out the door. And it's almost like what we're doing is we're driving down the road, or we're on a racetrack, and we're trying to build the car as we go. You know, sort of that type of mindset. How do we bring that type of mindset to bear? And so, especially now, I think what's really important is, not only are we having to sort of deal with what we have dealt with and trying to figure out how we're going to be able to support ourselves and staying well during this time, but based on what a lot of the research is showing, these epidemiologists, and we're starting to see it, you know, with the fall sort of increase right now and influx in cases, is that we're going to be working with a bit of like an accordion. Things are going to open up, things are going to close down. Things are going to open up, things are going to close down. And so this is, you know, what we're looking at, so the best modeling. So in this time, how are we going to keep ourselves well for the long run? Our habits have been disrupted. That means that there was a space for a period of time. How are we going to fill this space? There's only so much Netflix and YouTube and social media and news and this distraction that we can sort of fit in there. But what are we going to choose as our new habits? And right now is a very important moment in our lives to make a very important choice of how we're going to support ourselves over the next period of time until we figure this thing out collectively. And specifically to prepare for the mental health pandemic that's going to come after this. Because there's a lot of people saying, and a lot of the research have shown from previous quarantines and pandemics that have happened in the past, that there's a ripple effect of stress, anxiety, which we're already starting to see, but also post-traumatic stress. And so we just need to be able to see that clearly to be able to respond effectively. So the question is, wow, Michael, that's a lot of stuff that we've just explored here. How do I respond to this? It seems a bit overwhelming. You know, maybe I'm noticing my friends or my family or colleagues and coworkers having some challenge during this time. What can I do? Well, let's break it down a little bit here, okay? I did a bit of research, and there's a consulting company called Mckinsey and Company, whom is one of the leading researchers, research consulting and strategy consulting companies out there. And they came out with a really interesting report at what some of the top leaders and organizations do to support themselves, actually to excel in moments of crisis. And this is a really powerful quote. You know, it's not that we need like a, you know, a set pathway. Like, here, give me the steps, 1, 2, 3, and now I'll just get through this pandemic and I'm done. And I'll just do these check marks and, and life is complete. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. But what they found is that what we do need is behaviors and mindsets that will prevent us from overreacting to yesterday's developments and to help us to look ahead. Now, it's not saying, you know, what has happened didn't happen, or it's not sort of blatantly sort of accepting, like, and just saying, hey, you know, I'm just going to go with this and let's just, you know, let's see what happens. But actually seeing very clearly, we're not exaggerating the challenges that we're faced with. We're not diminishing it. We're just giving ourselves a chance to see it clearly, to be able to move through it. But how do we create these behaviors? How do we create these mindsets that can really help us to not overreact and to see clearly? And this is where neuroscience is coming in and showing that, well, we can actually develop these behaviors. We can develop these types of mindsets. And what's really interesting is there are mind training practices that we can do, and specifically that can actually change the structure and the functions of our brain and how it responds to stress and to what's happening in the moment. Instead of reacting, we can take a moment to regulate our emotions. Instead of being constantly pulled in different directions to perhaps all the media and all the things that perhaps are making a lot of negative and challenging experiences within us, we can choose to be present with what we're doing in this moment. Rather than perhaps being distracted and or, you know, judgmental of others, we can foster a sense of connection, empathy, and support and compassion. And when we do all of that, what they find is that not only does the brain change, that's what neuroplasticity means, is that the brain is more plastic, but we become more resilient, we become more caring, and our lives become more at ease, even in the face of challenge and crisis. So how do we do it? Well, mindfulness is the most researched and often the most effective practice that can help us. When we look at all the studies of all the different practices that are out there, practicing mindfulness can be really, really helpful. And what they're finding is right now there's been an explosion of research from Harvard, Stanford, Yale, like across the world. All the top neuroscience centers and all the top research centers are producing over 1,000 articles a year from the top, called peer-reviewed journals, where you have like a lot of researchers going, hey, did you do this right? There's even more. But what they're doing is now there's a huge explosion and there's been an exponential rise. So what ended up happening was, you know, in the 1980s, there's almost nothing, but when there started being a lot of money put into brain research, there's been a huge increase in scientific articles. And also, if you look at the number of newspaper stories on mindfulness, it's been increasing with the research. So what's happening is that the research based benefits, is actually making the media cover this. And the benefits are many that they're finding right now. And you just Google mindfulness and you'll find a whole bunch of it. And so what is mindfulness? The way that I like to define it is it's an ability that we all have. We all have it. And it's our ability to focus and be aware of what's happening in this moment. And maybe we become aware of how distracted we are, or how anxious or stressed we are. but that's an ability that we all have. Once we become aware in the moment, we can gain a bit of perspective rather than being caught up in those thoughts and, in our judgments of ourselves and others. We have a bit of space when we become aware. And in that space, there's empathy, there's compassion, there's a greater ease. And that helps us to respond with intention. So this is where we can actually make a choice instead of being sort of bouncing around and bouncing off the walls of life. We're much more choiceful in how we approach our lives. And so instead of reacting mindlessly, which sort of, well, this is just how I am, this is how things happen to me, this is just how life is. Instead of being driven by our habits, we have a chance to choose how we respond in the moment. So, to respond mindfully, there's a few key things that we need to do is to cultivate resilience, which is our ability to cope with what's happening and to be able to bounce back when we've been knocked off our horse, so to speak. The next thing is to practice connection, to truly connect, to truly listen without an agenda, without judgment, to allow ourselves to really hear other people and to even hear ourselves, and to connect as well with our environment, our surroundings, to practice connecting. And the other thing that we need to, that can really help us to respond mindfully is to make really important decisions about how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of others, and the world. So these are some ways that we can start developing that capacity. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing this, that are in the midst of it. I've had the great privilege of working with all these organizations, governments, some of the top tech companies, top universities. They're all sort of bringing leaders in all across the world are bringing these types of practices, and specifically mindfulness, to help support during this time. And the impact is remarkable. And I'm not going to go into this, but we actually did a research study on people that were going through a program before the pandemic. And we've studied thousands of people going through these practices, these mindfulness programs and practices. And before the pandemic, they started a program, and the pandemic hit, and the program continued. And after the pandemic, we studied them again. And we thought, okay, we started this program before and then after the pandemic. What's probably going to happen is that people are going to be perhaps a bit worse off. But what they found is when these practices were brought in, it actually increased their health and well-being dramatically more than we found before, where people weren't facing a crisis. So it might be possible that during this time, that bringing these practices can be extremely helpful for us, maybe even more so than before because there's more at stake. So just to think about that, increase in well-being, stress, ability to be more resilient, and even team climate increased when a team was doing this together. So how are you taking care of your team? Are you collectively practicing presence, gratitude, taking care of each other, connecting in with each other, making very choiceful decisions on how we approach our workday together, when we check in when we have meetings, when we don't have meetings, send emails, don't send emails. These are all different things and tactics that you could bring in to support your team. But right now, what I want to do is I want to share with you some tactics that can help you in the moment. So I'm going to invite all of you now to engage in a brief 1 to 2 minute practice. All right. And so we're going to do a practice right now called the Relax, Reflect, Respond practice. This practice can be done in 3 breaths, or it could be done in 2 to 3 minutes. You can choose to do this practice right now if you wish, or you can just listen, and that's just fine as well. Okay? You can do this practice with eyes open, or if you choose, you can do this practice with eyes closed. In the future, You can do this practice like a stealth mindfulness practice in any moment, in any setting. Because again, mindfulness is not about distracting ourselves from what's happening. It's not about shutting down our thoughts. It's not about figuring things out. It's not even a relaxation practice. It's really about seeing clearly the way things are, just as we've been doing right now. The whole thread has been seeing clearly the way things are so we can respond optimally. So let's just take a moment. If you wish to take part in this practice, I invite you to do so right now. Allowing yourself to assume a comfortable, relaxed, and alert seated posture. Lower your gaze below the screen, or close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. You can maintain an open gaze if that is more accessible. Resting your hands in your lap or your thighs, and just taking a few deep cleansing breaths. I'm just going to invite you now just to reflect on maybe a light stressor that you're facing right now. A 5-pound weight and not a 100-pound weight, okay? So a very light stressor that you might be dealing with, because just like any practices, the more we do this, the better we'll get at it. Maybe something that you're dealing with at work. And just calling it to mind. Just very briefly, calling this light stressor to mind. Just noticing what thoughts come up as you bring this challenge to mind. Maybe people that are present, things that were said, weren't said, and just notice what perhaps emotions are called up as you bring this challenge to mind. Emotions come up in the span of words. It could be frustration or anger, fear, jealousy. Or maybe no emotion is noticed or nothing comes up. That's just fine. Just notice that. As you bring that challenge to mind as well, just notice what body sensations come up. Maybe there's some tension in your body, the neck or the head. Just pay attention to these sensations. Maybe there's some heat or tingling or pressure in the chest or the belly. And now as you pay attention to these sensations, I want you to just take a few breaths now with full attention. So paying attention to your in-breath and out-breath just for a few moments at the space of your belly. Breathing in and breathing out. Allowing your breathing to be natural. Your body knows how to breathe. Paying attention to these breath sensations. And just bringing your attention back when you lose touch once in a while for a few more moments. And now I want to invite you to reflect. Can you let this go? Can you let this be? Or does this challenge need some type of action from you? Can you let it go? If you can't let it go, can you let it be? And does this need some action? And if it needs action, is it a change in your relationship, your behavior to it, your attitude? Or is it something that you need to do? Just reflecting for a few moments. And now responding, making the choice on how you're going to take care of yourself, the other, or perhaps the situation. Taking a full in breath and a full out breath, lifting your gaze or opening your eyes, and just carrying that reflection forward with you. It's a simple relax, reflect, respond. And if this was helpful for you, maybe just sharing in the chat, what did you choose? What did you choose to do? To support yourself or to support others? Maybe was it just let it be? Maybe it was let it go? Or are you going to take some type of action? I'm interested to see and to hear from you. So in the chat, you can just write that, or you might just say, what did you notice in terms of just taking a few moments to breathe and to be with it? Did it support you? Maybe it amplified things, and maybe you notice, wow, this is really stressful. I'm really dealing with this. Okay, so just noticing that, and just thinking, how are you going to respond? Fantastic. So we're seeing here, powerful, taking action, letting things go and letting it be, letting it go, definitely letting it go. Accept the feeling and let it be, let it go. I was anxious. I need to deal with the situation. So just maybe becoming aware, wow, this is really creating some anxiety in me. Improving that is not about my answer, but rather our answer. So interesting. So working on teams and how to approach it. I now have a headache. So sometimes we might even just be aware, wow, there's so much happening under the hood too, that we might just be wearing a lot of pressure too. And you might become aware of that. So just to finish off here, there's a whole host of tactics and a checklist that can help support you. This is going to be circulated with you all. As you go in, and to take care of others, you need to take care of yourself first and foremost. The first thing, prioritize self-care. Workout, meditate, walk in nature, journal. Take micro breaths. You might use this practice or just take a few calming breaths. Enjoy a warm beverage, doodle, or read. During breaks, take mindful walks, stand, sit, desk stretch. It's really important to bring that physical variation in there. Eat mindfully. Take a meal away from distractions and really appreciate it. Hydrate, very, very important for the brain and the body. Limit social media and news consumption. This is very important because our brain is like Velcro to the negative and Teflon to the positive. The positive just sort of slides right off. The negative sticks. There's a reason why news, gleans on some of the negative stuff. Practice gratitude every day. Reflect on one thing that you are grateful for and connect. Acknowledge, express gratitude to or check in with colleagues, friends, and family. And limit screen time, sleep. 7 to 8 hours, very important. These are all research-based practices. We're going to distribute this to you all as a reference tool. And I just want to say thank you so much for participating in this webinar. I hope this is helpful for you. If you do have one takeaway, please put it into the chat. I'd be very interested to hear what was most valuable to you. What's that one thing that you're going to take away from our time together? And thank you so much for coming on this journey with us.
Mr. Michael Apollo, thank you for that. Even for myself, all these emotions were going on in my mind when I was doing that 3R practice. When I realized one thing, it's raining outside. I wasn't even aware of the weather this morning as much as I could have been by really reflecting and choosing to be mindful in the moment. Even in addition to that, Mike, I have to tell you, every time I hear you speak, I have my notebook and I have multiple pencils. They're flying everywhere. I'm trying to write notes. I'm trying to be mindful. And so it's fantastic. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak. And like I said, I think you mentioned a number of points that we can then bring back to our loved ones. So thank you.
My pleasure.